If you're confused on why this type of video is being uploaded in May month, the long version is going to be on screen. The short version is that I like this little tradition of making these gains of the previous year videos a little too much just to scrap what I already have. I only realized this video was going to be on the overwhelming side when I was deep into production. The Inevitable Games of 2023 video is being heavily restructured to take less time to make, and the next major video is something I plan to release in the next few weeks. Also, there's going to be a little update on that video at the end of this one, so keep an eye out for that.
2022 was indeed a year. I don't have much to say about it. As far as a 12-month period in my life is concerned, I feel a little underwhelmed with how little of note actually happened. This was the year of my biggest hiatus, alongside an endless series of problems that mess with my productivity at the tail end of the year. This was also the year that I got that dreaded virus that I'm not gonna name. Let's say I got Ligma. After spending a whole 2 years avoiding it, and honestly, I'm looking forward to the clean slate that 2023 is going to offer me. But, I shouldn't obsess over the negatives, and looking past all that, I did experience a bunch of video games in 2022, and I want to share my favorites that I played throughout the year. This is going to be a fun video, since I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk about games that I might not get a chance to talk about in my regular content. And since I know there are all those real gamers out there that are complaining that there's nothing to play right now, consider using this video as a list of games that you should check out during the inevitable drought of new game releases in 2023. Oh, and to appease the algorithm gods, let's play a little game. If I mention a game that you're familiar with, feel free to talk about it in the comment section down below. I'd like to hear what you guys think, and for my videos to not get buried by YouTube. Also, like and subscribe if you enjoy the video and all that jazz. Anyhow, I've got 20 games to talk about and 5 DLCs to discuss, so let's get to the retrospect thing. Frostpunk was a game that I quite liked for being a hybrid of a city builder and a survival game, with the glue connecting these aspects together being the fleeting strength of the human spirit surviving in an endless winter. The Last Autumn is a prequel that takes place long before the main story, where you and a crew of contractors have to build a generator before the eternal winter starts. Removing the weather as a hazard for most of the story puts more emphasis on the time management and battling against Murphy's Law. I found it to be a tad easy, but the DLC was worth the money I spent on it. I invested some time in the DLC for Little Nightmares this year, with the 3 level packs having their own vibe. The first one was on par with the main game, the second one was unique, but kinda dull to be honest, and the last chapter was pretty good. In several instances, I'd argue that the Residence trumps the base game. The puzzles hit that sweet spot of being challenging while avoiding the pitfall of becoming obtuse, and there was a moment in this level that actually scares me. Little Nightmares as a whole was more spooky than scary, so to have a moment like this, I'd consider to be quite the accomplishment. Echoes of the Eye is a great expansion to a game that it's attached to, but I need to actually talk about the base game so people can understand why I like this content as much as I do. I'll get back to the subject later in the video. Risk of Rain 2 is my jam, a roguelike that reinvigorated my love of the genre by having some crazy ideas like endlessly stacking items and a Z-axis. Survivors of the Void added a lot to an already content-rich game, with 2 new characters, a bunch of new items to mess around with, new stages, and a bunch of new enemies, with the Void itself acting as a great theme to wrap the expansion around. I really like this content, and I'm definitely looking forward to that Risk of Rain 1 remake that Hope Who is working on. The delicious last course took 5 years to make, and dang, was it worth the wait. This DLC comes with a new island to play on, with its own set of bosses to fight against, with the run and gun levels of the base game having been traded out for puzzle bosses that test the player's ability to parry attacks. The big selling point are the bosses, which are just fantastic. I don't think there's a single weak boss in this entire DLC's roster. In addition to all this, Miss Chalice is now playable, and she's a fantastic alternative to the main characters. Her moveset is generally better, but she lacks the charm slot that Cuphead and Mugman have, so it's a fair trade-off. If somehow you haven't played this yet, consider getting Cuphead and the delicious last course. Both of these are experiences that are worth your time. I quite enjoyed Breath of the Wild. Comparing it to the rest of the Zelda franchise, I'd say that it's only behind Majora's Mask as my personal favorite. That said, as a fan of Breath of the Wild, I was looking for a simple game to play, and I stumbled upon this game that sold itself on fan service. Not that kind of fan service. Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity is a sort of prequel to Breath of the Wild, depicting the grand battles that took place before everything went straight to hell, with a couple of caveats here and there. I mean, I don't recall seeing this little mini-guardian in Breath of the Wild's flashbacks, and the weapons here are a lot more durable than the ones you find a century later. The combat can easily be boiled down to style over substance, but it's hard not to appreciate something that's this viscerally appealing. Getting to knock over hundreds of dudes with little effort is just fun to watch. I know this is standard for a Warriors game, but this is the first one that I'm playing, so I got a good amount of mileage out of this mindless button mashing, even when the frame rate was starting to chug. While the combat itself has the depth of a spoon, the gameplay loop is incredibly strong. You do a standard mission, which requires you to beat up hundreds of people, and from those missions you'll get resources. You can then dump these resources into random events that will make Hyrule a safer place, and this will also upgrade a specific character. Speaking about characters, I found most of them to be pretty fun to play as, with all of them having enough distinction to give the core gameplay loop some variety. Like a lot of people, I was a bit miffed that the game turned into fanfiction after a specific juncture in the story, especially since it was marketed as a prequel. I will give credit to the voice actors, though, for putting in a better performance this time around, especially compared to their ones in Breath of the Wild, which were kind of wooden, if I be honest. A few moments in the story actually got me to appreciate the characters that would then appear in Breath of the Wild, so that's much appreciated. At the end of the day, Age of Calamity wanted to be a fun, fan service game, and sticking to that parameter resulted in getting more out of this setting than the tragic flashbacks would have promised. I went into this game expecting some mindless action, and I was left with something that had a little bit of heart put into it, and that's nice.
Success!
Damn, this game looks fantastic. Why'd I put it so low on the list again? Oh. Well, that's unfortunate. Just Cause 3 has all the makings of a modern classic. It's an uncomplicated formula for success. You're a badass armed with the most OP grappling hook in video games, an arsenal of weapons, and are asked to blow shit up. This ends with you saving the day, somehow using a string of logic that makes absolutely no sense, but I get an excuse to break everyone else's stuff, so I won't dwell on it. The game world is half the size of the universe, so there's a lot of stuff to blow up, and honestly, criticizing this game is kinda hard, since the individual pieces are well put together. Getting around the game world is a blast. The grappling hook and wingsuit combo make for one of the most liberating movement systems in a modern game. So much so that I'm not all that driven to use the fast travel unless the distance is too far, as it should be. Getting this movement tech makes the task of liberating the island all the more enjoyable. As you liberate more areas, you get more vehicles and weapons to keep the destruction going. Rinse, repeat, and blow stuff up until you beat the game. Unfortunately, the problem rears its head when you blow one too many things up. The game's frame rate is atrocious. No matter what I did with lowering my settings or upgrading my hardware, nothing fixed the problem. And my computer can run Doom Eternal at above average settings, so it isn't my hardware that's turning the game into a slideshow. And don't even get me started on this game's worthless DRM. These problems were obnoxious, but that wasn't able to stop me from powering through the game and liberating the whole country. I even dabbled in some of the DLC that I got with my copy of the game. There's not much to say beyond the fact that the vehicles, jetpacks, and lightning gun were fantastic additions to the game. It's well integrated to the point where if I didn't see those slideshow cutscenes, I would have assumed that it was part of the main game. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with Just Cause 3, despite the numerous problems. Why? I don't know, just cause, I guess. Nintendo is well known for going through old territory with sequels and occasional re-releases, but when they get around to remaking their old games, that's when things start to get interesting. I was a big fan of the 3DS remakes of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, since it gave both games a facelift and a couple of quality of life changes to make them worth playing over the original, unless you're a speedrunner. This praise can also be applied for the remake of Link's Awakening for the Switch. Unlike all the previous examples, Link's Awakening goes for a toy-like aesthetic, which is interesting to say the least. Would be cool if we got HD sprites akin to Octopath Traveler, but I did warm up to this art style. It kept the minimalist look from the Game Boy games while adding detail to the few scenes that would benefit from the facelift. The game is structured in the same vein as other 2D Zelda games, like A Link to the Past, where you travel across the land, fight off monsters, and complete dungeons. The dungeons in this game are kinda simple to a fault. I get this was a Game Boy game, but none of the dungeons stuck out in the same way that other Zelda games have done. The volcano one kinda sticks out, but not by much. I recall hearing about one noteworthy element of this game being the story, and the fact that Link is not really the hero of this game. Some of the bosses point out that the overarching goal of waking the Windfish will destroy the island and its inhabitants. This moral dilemma is never expanded upon, and honestly, it's a missed opportunity with this remake. What it did accomplish was making a cozy adventure game with a fun aesthetic, especially with the NPCs and the personality that they bring. I wasn't enthralled by this game, but I found the adventure to be a comfortable ride and the story to be unique enough that I can only assume someone else will get more mileage from the game's themes than I did. And that's noteworthy at least. In 2022, I played a Zelda game and a Zelda spin-off, and I consider a Zelda clone to be the better game. I'd attempt to tread lightly with this opinion, but the game in question stars a doggo, so I have nothing to be ashamed of. Chicory, A Colorful Tale, has quite the interesting team of people working on it. The devs for this game include ones that worked on Celeste, Night in the Woods, and Wandersong. All three of these games had left some impression on me, so naturally, I wanted to give this game a shot. Chicory takes place in the unforgettable Land of Luncheon, a land of animals, food names, and painting. In a game named Chicory, you play as her janitor, an unlikely protagonist who stumbled upon a magic paintbrush and made it their job to recolor the world. Said world looks like a coloring book, which makes the idea of painting in these colors feel very appealing. Mechanically, you use the paint to manipulate the environment and make traversing the world easier, with the added benefit of giving the game world a personal touch, since you're coloring in the environment. And to anyone who can't draw, don't worry, the game is limited enough that everything is gonna look messy. But caring about appearances is missing the point. Chicory is just as much about the inherent joy of making art, an important aspect that anyone in a creative field would tell you is a necessity, though it also goes into the struggle of making art in the long term by looking into things like self-doubt and imposter syndrome, and I can respect a game that tries to tackle these topics. This was a cozy experience, and the story beats discussed and the struggles of putting something out there into the world is noteworthy in the sense that it can be applied to other mediums, such as video production. I gotta say, I enjoyed my time with The World Ends With You. Well, that's quite a few asterisks. Looks like I'm gonna have to qualify that praise. There's no better example of a cult classic title than The World Ends With You, a DS title whose qualities can still be appreciated to this very day. And I play the Switch version. Twooey Final Remix is an A++ game that's burdened by having to be played on a device without dual screens and no proper substitution. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. From top to bottom, this game has the makings of classic. The art style and character designs alone make this one of the greatest games that Tetsuya Nomura has ever worked on. You can tell that Neku was cut from the same cloth as Sora and Cloud, but there are enough distinguishing features that give each character their own identity. The RPG elements were solid and allowed for a ton of customization since you can change Neku's entire moveset between battles. It even comes with a low-level challenge run built into the game itself, with rewards to balance things out. The music was pretty damn good. While I don't live or die on J-pop, the soundtrack has a good amount of energy and variety to keep the game interesting. Hell, the cast of characters had left a good enough impression on me that I wanted to see this game through to the end, with the math-obsessed Sho Minamoto being my favorite character in the game. If only those controls weren't such a hindrance. I played this game in handheld mode since trying to get the docked mode to even work properly was an arcane process that I wasn't in the mood for. There was a golden opportunity to recreate the DS's control scheme with the buttons on the Switch, but it's touchscreen or bust. Even the pause button is on the touchscreen. Speaking of missed opportunities, why not add voice acting to this version of the game? I mean, this isn't Pokemon. Cutting this many corners will only annoy people, especially since this was sold for full price. Look, maybe if I play the DS version I'd be singing a different tune, but let it be known that the strengths of this game were more than enough to get me to see it through to the end. If that doesn't tell you about the quality of the game, then I'm not sure what will. Dishonored was a fantastic stealth assassination game that holds up surprisingly well for a game that was from 2012. Its sequel, Dishonored 2, is a case of second verse same as the first, but with some extras. One of the big features from the first game was the duality of decisions that you can make that also had the benefit of adding more replay value. Kill or dishonor your targets for different endings. There was a tweak made to the morality system that allowed for more flexibility, so you can kill a few random guards and still get the good ending. The sequel cranks out the replay value by having these two routes, plus the alterations of playing as Corvo or Elizabeth, with each character having their own set of powers that beg for another playthrough. If that wasn't enough, you could even go powerless as a challenge run, so there's no shortage of replayability in this game. And replaying the game is a good idea, since a few of the areas you travel through have some of the greatest level design in modern video games. The Clockwork Mansion is a work of pure brilliance. The game world is stunningly beautiful. The painted look is taken to the next level with an engine upgrade that gives the world some nice details. I mean, look at the water. It looks so good. Looks like the making of an instant classic, however, there's a big old but that's gonna ruin everything. While the game has some incredible levels, the rest of the batch fall into the trap of being just average city levels that vary in quality. One of them, like the Dust District, is just bad if I'm being perfectly honest. This wouldn't hurt so much if in these levels there weren't the odd case where enemies just have selective eagle vision. I get the desire to break away from enemies with comically small vision cones, but this might be going a little too far in the opposite direction. My last annoyance is that the plot was just the first game again, but somehow even more simplistic, which is saying a lot since the first game was a basic revenge story. None of these were enough to spoil the fun I had, and who knows, maybe I'll warm up to the game on a second playthrough. Only time will tell. Survival horror is a genre that I've been getting more acquainted with in the last few years. I've even found a few favorites while making an effort to diversify the games I play. However, no amount of surviving the horrors of these games could prepare me for the terror of battling my backlog and defeating the one game that's been sitting in my Steam library, mocking me ever since I bought it back in 2015. Prior to me playing it, I've owned Amnesia: The Dark Descent for 7 years, and circa a few months ago, I could now say that I've actually beaten it. How could I have struggled with such a simple game that's not even that long? Someone's inevitably gonna ask. Well, simple. I tried playing it, made a tiny amount of progress, and then something spooky happened, and then I immediately closed the game out of fear, followed by uninstalling out of embarrassment. But in 2022, I was able to persevere and see it through to the end. It also helped that I had a Twitch audience sending me words of encouragement as I was freaking out. The game might be on the very old side, but time has not taken away its fear factor. The atmosphere is top tier stuff and definitely stands the test of time. Even when I figured out the game's tricks, like how enemies spawn in relation to my actions, I was still getting a good scare from the game. While the horror in this game is fantastic, the puzzles are a different story. They vary in quality from pretty unique to esoteric to an obnoxious degree. One of the worst examples was a puzzle that had no hint on how to solve it, which required me to make 2 rooms close off to one another perfectly mirror one another. How was anyone supposed to find that out on their own? But hey, the game did spawn an entire entourage of imitators, so I can't be too mad at a few growing pains, right? Yeah, maybe I can. Now, this was a pleasant surprise. I was skimming through Steam and I found a puzzle adventure game that had a really appealing art style. It looked like something I'd see in the Cartoon Network show with these wild character designs. I played it and it was a nice little mystery game that had the benefit of having a solid story as well. Tangle Tower has a duo of detectives coming over to solve the murder of an artist on a strange island. One where the plants and animals are more bizarre than the people actually living on this remote island. The victim in question was murdered by a stab wound, and the only one in the room holding a knife was the portrait that she was working on. The game itself looks really nice, especially the backgrounds, which have a gorgeous painted aesthetic. The Professor Layton-esque puzzles were pretty clever, and I enjoyed solving most of them, with the larger puzzle of piecing together the murder mystery was very captivating. The collection of characters were all fun to talk to, and had some solid voice acting to carry the conversation along. Heck, the mansion itself was strange enough to be its own character, with its own set of secrets to uncover. Though my major complaint is that the ending of this game felt incredibly rushed. Like the second it was narrowed down who the murderer was, the game abruptly jumps to its conclusion. Shame we couldn't stick the landing at the end, but as someone who likes games like Ace Attorney, I had a good time with this title. During the month of Spooks, I was in the mood to experience some frightful media, and that led me to playing some more spooky games. I used that time to finally beat Amnesia, a game that I mentioned earlier in the video, and I decided to play the 3DS version of the original Luigi's Mansion. It was okay. This is the part where someone tells me how I played the worst part of a classic title and all that jazz. While you're down there in the comments, feel free to mention all the lore I missed from Dark Moon, cause I skipped ahead to the 3rd game. And this was really good. Luigi's Mansion 3 shakes up the formula by taking place in a hotel as opposed to a mansion. false advertising much. Aside from making me wonder if toasters toast or not, I like the idea of using a hotel for this game, since the structure allows for a variety of set pieces. You can go from a floor that's just a couple of bedrooms to one that's a full-on museum a few floors later, and that's just cool. This leads to the activities you do on each floor getting shaken up, along with the boss ghosts of each floor being radically different from one another. This game is polished to a mirror shine. Not only is the presentation fantastic, with high-quality textures and animations on every character, there's also an absurd amount of detail put into this game. There were moments where I had to double check that this was a Switch game, and that's just astounding. Then again, it would be criminal for a Switch exclusive to be buggy and unpolished. I mean, you're paying full price for these games, so they better be put together competently. I have some nitpicks though. While these levels and bosses have a ton of variety, the enemies are incredibly samey, with a few of the common ghosts being just recolors of one another, or altered in size. That just felt lazy. Also, this game is the poster child for why I think cats are jerks. Since every few floors I'm expected to backtrack just to hunt down a cat so I can get the elevator button back. It's a good example of how aggressive backtracking can nearly kill the flow of a game. I mean, the game feels long enough, I don't know why it's pushing so hard for a longer playtime. That low blow to the game's potential replay value aside, I had a lot of fun with this game. This might be up there as one of my favorite games on the Switch, all things considered. Indie games have a tendency of going into darker subject matter, and that's something that I can respect. Especially with this game, one that tackles the harsh reality of having all your loved ones struggle with their mortality and you having to bear witness to the very last moments of their lives. Now you might be thinking that I'm just messing with you, but no, I assure you, this game will be relentless when it comes to giving you the feels. Spiritfarer is a bright and colorful game about traveling across the river, well, more like an ocean of Styx, where you take in the spirits of the departed, travel with them, and give them comfort on their path to the other side. This game is structurally a weird mix-up of a life sim and a platformer. The simulation part of the game requires you to attend to your friends' needs while moving your mobile apartment complex across the ocean. The platformer part consists of bits where you jump around levels to gather the necessary resources to feed into the life sim part, with the odd upgrade that you'll get in order to expand the areas that you can explore. It's pretty fun, especially when you get into a good rhythm and have your friends give you the extra skills to do more things and to improve the ship and everyone's experience. All of this creates the perfect method of lowering the player's guard for when the game hits you with the emotional gut punch. When you hit a certain point with a specific character's list of quests, you'll have to say goodbye, and it never gets easier. Even my emotionally jaded ass wasn't immune to this. I was almost on the verge of tearing up when the frog guy had left my ship. It all works to create this feeling of sadness when you realize what was left behind and the importance of making the time that you spend with your loved ones matter the most. This absolutely beautiful message tends to be muddled a bit when I run into the restrictiveness of the game world, making this epic ocean feel more segmented than I'd personally like. The aggressive linearity is annoying, but the experience that Spiritfarer had offered me will stick with me long after I finish my playthrough. I gotta say, this game really makes you feel like Spider. I've noticed a weird genre of game that's been cropping up as of late where you just play as an animal doing animal things. The darling child of 2022 was Stray, a cat simulator that wowed audiences all over the internet with its dedicated meow button. As for me, I played a game where the main character is a spooter. In Webbed, you play as a spider, doing spider things like spinning webs, climbing up said webs, eating flies, and shooting lasers. Like a real spider. You play as Girl Spider hanging out with your mate, doing cute dances and wondering how tasty you'll be with some garnish. Then a big old bird shows up and kidnaps your boyfriend. Now you'll have to travel around the backyard and get the help of other local bugs to build a hot air balloon to save your partner. The game has the structure of a collectathon platformer where you swing around and complete tasks in a given area, using your webs. The webs themselves are fun to get around with, since your character has just the right amount of weight that swinging around feels good, and actually needing to aim the webs gives the game a good amount of game feel. The webs can also be used to add more walkable areas to the environment, so it really makes you play into the role of a spider. Minus the desire to help these bugs when realistically you'd be snacking on half of them. Instead, you'll be doing that with the flies, since even to other bugs, flies are just the worst. The tasks are pretty fun to do, and there's a good amount of variety between the 3 levels. The web mechanic is used pretty cleverly, so this short game was able to get the most use out of this mechanic. I did run into some annoyances with puzzles requiring you to move weighted objects, but that was usually the outlier. And that's Webbed, a cute little game that's fun to swing around in. And you can skateboard in the game. That's just awesome. As you can tell from the video so far, I haven't been keeping up with the new release schedule for 2022. I only have so much cash that I can spend at a given time, so a game really needs to stand out for me to buy it at full price. I'm saying all this because in PlayStation's State of Play, I saw an indie game that did a few things to stand out. The art style stuck out, but also the style of gameplay really made me want to get Rollerdrome as soon as I could. And it was great. Rollerdrome is a game where you skate and shoot your way through hordes of enemies in a blood sport arena. The gameplay loop involves you gunning down your fellow man like the monster that you are, and when you need to reload, you can do a sick trick in place of the reload button. What this boils down to is gameplay that is a cathartic string of attacks, flips, and rail grinds that is just as fun to watch as it is to play. The learning curve was a tad annoying in the beginning, but the game is pretty fun and very challenging. The later levels don't mess around, which fits for the tone that the game is going for. I put emphasis on tone and not story, cause it's a typical dystopian setting akin to Hunger Games, but there's not much else. I think I blinked at the wrong time since I missed all the context as to why I'm even playing this deadly game in the first place. While I had fun with the main gameplay loop, I was mildly annoyed with how the game implemented its replay value. I don't have a problem with optional goals for replayability, I do have a problem when it becomes mandatory. Every few levels you need to complete X amount of optional goals to get to the next batch of levels. This was annoying, but you don't need to beat the level for the completion mark to count, so clearing out the extra objectives wasn't all that bad. As far as games that were released last year, I think this one is a hidden gem. Hopefully it gets more of a following, cause there's a lot going for this one. So I began this year by catching up with the last console Sucker Punch game that I hadn't played yet, Infamous Second Son. Despite being a launch title for the PS4, I wasn't really driven to play this game, even when I got the console and the game was going down in price. Something about it wasn't clicking with me, and around the time I got my PS4, Ghost of Tsushima was getting announced. But last year, I got around to playing it, and I had a pretty good time. It isn't in the same league as Infamous 2, but even the weakest game from Sucker Punch is still a fun ride. This game stars Delsin Rowe, a parkouring delinquent that's kind of an ass, even on a good day. He learns in a similar way to X-Men that he has conduit powers, and is put on a quest to take down the leader of a local PMC to save his tribe. The gameplay loop is the Infamous formula down to a T. Delsin has absurd grip strength, and can climb most surfaces, turning the city into his personal jungle gym. You start off with the ability to fire off smoke projectiles, and along the way you'll gain the ability to absorb and use abilities like Neon, Internet, along with Concrete for the post-game. These abilities are pretty fun to use. I especially like how each of them feel distinct from one another with their own movement abilities and rate of fire. The inability to switch between them on the fly was a tad annoying, and it felt like there's not too much depth with the unlocks of these powers. The game world looks great though. Instead of making up a fake city loosely inspired by a real one, they went all in with the setting of Seattle, almost feeling like a spiritual predecessor to Insomniac's Spider-Man with its rendition of New York. Getting around the city has a good flow, especially when you get Neon to run up the side of buildings, and the activities to capture territory were fun to do. And I did have fun, so much so that I can almost ignore how this map feels slightly smaller than the one in Infamous 2. The story was nothing special though. Since the two misfits that you meet along the way have all the personality of cardboard cutouts, Delsin was kind of grating at a few scenes, but at least in the hero route, he becomes more of a likable asshole, so he's got that going for him. Also, the dialogue between Delsin and his brother felt pretty natural, so I did end up liking that. The game was a bit of a mixed bag, but I warmed up to it by the end of my playthrough, and that's nice to see. Indie developers have made efforts with taking old ideas and putting their own spin on the formula, resulting in them making effectively the same game, but with a little bit more polish. Retro revivals have been around for a long while now. In fact, we've had plenty of retro-style games covering the 8-bit and 16-bit aesthetics, so we're progressing into the early 3D era of games. At first, it was copying the structure, like with A Hat in Time, but now we're making games that just go down to the aesthetics, like with Demon Turf, a 3D platformer attempting to emulate the movement of Super Mario 64. And damn if it doesn't come close. The game is about a little demon girl that has the power of resting bitch face, going on a journey to defeat the leader of the demon world. She'll do this by taking down the leaders of each of the game's turfs and play through the colorful set of levels leading up to these jerks. I was initially hesitant to play this game because the main character was a 2D sprite, and depth perception is a little important to me in a platforming game. To my surprise, I was able to get a good handle on the controls. Phoebes controls like a dream. Her movement, jump height, and overall moveset would definitely get the Italian plumber's seal of approval. This even includes moves like the triple jump, side jump, and this game's equivalent to the long jump. The level design is pretty good overall, since there's a solid amount of variety between the set pieces of each stage. Most of them are simple obstacle courses, going from point A to B, while others open up, making more use of your moveset for collecting items. Heck, the game isn't even light on content either. After beating a world, you get a set of remix levels that are more challenging and use different abilities to spice things up. The game does have a few rough edges. The first world in particular doesn't have the best aesthetic, which doesn't give a good impression for how good the later levels look. The combat is tolerable at best, but I hear it was cut in the standalone expansion, and honestly I won't miss it. Also, the last stretch to unlock the final level doesn't give much wiggle room with the collectibles, unlike its inspiration, Mario 64. Despite the rough spots, I enjoyed this game overall. There's a lot of quality stuff here, and I'm tempted to go back for the side content. And hey, I might even get that standalone expansion as well. Roguelikes have been going through a massive resurgence in the last few years, mostly by straying away from the original Rogue to do some different things. In fact, most games with random level generation feel so different from the original Rogue that you'll have nerds getting mad at you if you don't call them roguelites instead. Hades was one of those new roguelites that had the internet awestruck with its grand innovations, like having a story, and very appealing character designs. I expect no less from Supergiant Games, since they're always trying something new when it comes to making interactive narrative. The plot of Hades tells the tale of Zagreus, the prince of the underworld, who wants to leave the fiery pits of Tartarus for the land above. His father, Hades, is having none of that. The gameplay loop for this game is pretty fantastic. You go through gauntlets of combat encounters with a relationship-building life sim sprinkled in between each run. Even during the runs, these two elements find a way to coincide, so in some way, one ends up feeding into the other. The weapons you have on offer are great. Each of them feel different from one another, and they all have a good amount of impact to them. They can even be altered with different aspects, so there's plenty of variety. Along with that, you'll get boons and other upgrades, which will change how the run will go, from passive changes to active ones that will change the flow of combat. The extra wrinkle of this story comes from the narrative between the cast of characters that evolve between runs. Heck, it doesn't even end after beating Hades for the first time. The real drive is to replay the game and see how it all ends. Another is the characterization of the Greek gods, and the interesting spin that Supergiant put into this game. The slick art and fantastic voice acting definitely bring a lot of life to these characters. And, speaking about the arts, it's, very nice. I'm led to pick up a few boons for more than just their effects in combat. Not sure if the game should be given credit for that, but I'll roll with it. With the sequel announced, it's safe to say that there's more interesting tales to come from these Greek legends that go far beyond the House of Hades, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. Bisexuals just keep on winning. I don't play that many co-op games. It's not from a lack of any options, I just don't have that many people I hang out with locally. Even with online games, I run into the struggle of finding time to play with friends due to different time zones. Plus, there's the prospect of buying a game that'll become dead software and eating up space on my hard drive if I don't have anyone to play it with. I did run into one exception though, since my partner Steffi Sparta and I were looking for a game to play, with It Takes Two having an interesting selling point. Basically, if one person buys the game, the second player can download a Player 2 copy of the game for free. This is an incredibly pro-consumer move that comes off as extra surprising when you realize that EA published this game. It Takes Two is an action-adventure platformer that borrows 100 different ideas from other games to add an almost honorable amount of variance for a co-op game. The beginning of this fun ride tackles the most enjoyable aspect of life, that is, getting a divorce, then running into some nightmare fuel. The recently broken up couple are turned into toys and go on a magical odyssey to eventually turn back to normal, and also save their marriage, I guess.
As mentioned earlier, this game is a platformer with a collection of alternate playstyles thrown in. What ends up happening is that you'll begin a level and each player is given a unique item that gives them a different set of abilities for that level. In the first level alone, one player gets a nail that functions like the axe from God of War, and the other gets a big F-off hammer. Things only get wilder from there since the game includes things like puzzle platforming and full-on boss fights. Good boss fights too. And that's a lot of effort for a game where the two players will just be messing around and calling each other gay for half the playthrough. Oh yeah, and one last observation that I want to take note of is the fact that I'm not sure if this platformer game is made for kids. Don't be fooled by the bright colors. This game contains a scene with a toy elephant that emotionally broke two 20-somethings. I don't think either of us will emotionally recover from that moment. Oh, and speaking about us, here's a cameo.
Hi. You know, people like to bring up the morality of your actions when it comes to stuff like The Last of Us. Well, did The Last of Us ever make you rip up your daughter's stuffed animal and throw it off of a shelf? Didn't think so. Oh, and by the way, you're cute.
No, wait, you're cute. Oh, she's gone. Anyhow, color me surprised that I'd get this much enjoyment from a co-op game. I can definitely see why this got Game of the Year when it came out.
Normally, I would have walloped a lot of them, of course, but I just had me tea. The villains collared the both of us and, well, I just hope she's alright.
Sorry, my American senses went off and I had to throw some tea in a nearby river. I gotta say, that was incredibly British. Trying to beat games in a timely manner is a struggle when you have so many JRPGs in your backlog. Though playing through one can be a blessing, since the time invested can feel rewarding if it hits the right notes. Dragon Quest XI's was definitely that kind of game. The story of this game is just your standard template for a fantasy RPG. You start off as a young man, and an inciting incident causes you to go off on a grand adventure where you'll run into a colorful cast of characters to bring along with you on your journey. At some point you'll have to collect a bunch of MacGuffins that in some way will save the world, and maybe you'll fight a dragon at some point. All these familiar tropes can be forgiven, seeing as Dragon Quest had popularized these tropes in video games nearly 40 years ago. Even though I felt how worn the territory had been, I still found this game to be rather absorbing. This game has a comfy vibe, where the battles are simple enough and have a nice flow to them, but it still has teeth and puts up some form of a challenge in some of the encounters. The skill tree in this game is just fantastic. There's room for specialization in specific parts of the tree, making the team setup very flexible. Hell, I even like the crafting in this game, since there's a fun little minigame that even rewards skill, since it results in gear with higher stats. The game in general has a good flow after the opening prologue, where you travel from town to town, talk with a collection of characters with fun designs, and go on quests to put some good out there into the world. It's just a nice game that gives off some good vibes, and the moments of legit character growth feel earned after going on an adventure with all these colorful companions. My only big criticism is that most games have a 3-act structure, similar to film, but this game alters things by only having 2 major acts, the moments before getting to Ygritte Hill and the flash forward a few months later. It really sucks that there's no more story after the second act, but hey, at least there's no way the game can undermine the fantastic character development that happened up to that point, and at least it ended when it had to and left a good story alone. And that's all we can ask for, right? The cult classic Psychonauts is in a pretty good position. It was one of the first few games to jump on the burgeoning digital market and got its second win through platforms like Steam. That's how I play the game, and Double Fine decided to strike while the iron was hot and looked into crowdfunding the sequel. After a long saga of delays, spin-offs, and a Microsoft publishing deal, we finally get to see the fruit of their labor. To the surprise of no one, I'm gonna say that this game is fantastic. This was the sequel that the developers wanted to make for more than a decade, and it lived up to that expectation. The story has elevated itself from the fantasy of becoming a Psychonaut in the first game to the reality attached to the job and all the baggage that comes along with it. It's kind of wild that the game is as tightly written as it is, with all the direct callbacks to the first game not feeling ham-fisted in the slightest. The dialogue doesn't miss a beat, with the writing having just as much bite as the first game. My only issue is that some of the side characters felt a tad underdeveloped. You meet a couple of interns early on, but at a certain point in the story, everyone is just hunting for a mole in the Psychonauts, and a few of the interns assume it's Raz, and it kinda stays that way until the end of the game. I get that the Psychic 6 were the more important characters, but an optional line or two to fill in the gap would have been appreciated. The first game was leaning heavily on its story to sell the experience, with the raw gameplay being standard for the time it was released. and it was passable. The platforming and combat in Psychonauts 2 has been refined to the point where it can be compared to higher quality platformers of today. In a few instances, I think it might be a little bit better. The combat is usually an afterthought with these kind of games, but here it feels better integrated. Most of the Bratz's powers return from the first game, with new ones like Mental Connection feeling like a natural extension of the imaginative concepts from the first game. The imagination is on full display here, and the benefits of new technology means that level design can get more bizarre than the first game ever could. So every level feels like a highlight. If you had to ask me which level was my favorite, it would probably be Psy King's Sensorium. The change in the art style for this level and the concept of traveling through an overstimulated mind was great, especially with that reveal at the end. Though Bob's Bottles comes at a good second place, just for the life story of Bob Zanotto. Not exactly for the subtlety of how Bob has a struggle with addiction, but for the way that everything unfolded. It was a beautiful level. The game even has a solid conclusion, tying both itself and the first game together neatly. If this is the last game that we'll be seeing from this series, then I think it definitely ended on a high note. Kirby as a series has been going pretty strong after the franchise returned to Dreamland, and every mainline game from the Wii to the Switch have been fairly enjoyable. I think the only low point for me was Star Allies, since outside of the element mixing, there really wasn't much going for it. I was expecting something more ambitious from a new Kirby game on a console, and Forgotten Lands has delivered big time. Kirby in the Forgotten Lands is a beautiful transition to 3D, with the changes made to the series feeling almost effortless with its execution. The game not only adds a Z-axis to the formula, but it also changes up the environment from the Dreamland aesthetic that has been standardized for the last few years to a run-down environment, a land that has been forgotten, as you can tell, and it's a nice visual shakeup. The copy abilities made the transition smoothly, with the new addition being the upgrades that you can get for these abilities. They vary in quality, but these evolutions to these 12 existing abilities add a ton of variety to a playthrough of the game. The level sticks to the point A to B design of Kirby games before it, but the things you can do in these levels keep things from feeling samey. The Carnival world was my favorite, due in part to all the variety that each level brings. Oh, and the Waddle Dees are here. If you find them, you'll get an army of adorable friendos, and said army will also build up a town, complete with extra content. Also, there's a new gimmick for the game, the mouthful modes. It's kind of crazy that Kirby is manipulating the devices like this. These moments are pretty fun. They're also kind of cursed, but I can't help but enjoy the sight of Kirby becoming the stairs. I could go into other things, but at the end of the day, this game was just a breath of fresh air for the series, and it was just plain old fun, and that's all I can ask for. Anyone who's conversed with me about anything video game related last year already knew what game was going to be topping this list, but for those not in the know, let's talk about Outer Wilds. Actually, before I go any further, can I just say that it's oddly poetic that a game about the cruelty and indifference of the universe was doomed from the minute it came out? The game was released around the time E3 coverage was dominating the mainstream outlets. It was an Epic Game Store exclusive for a good while, and it has a similar name to Obsidian's The Outer Worlds. On top of all of that, this game has a weird premise that I'm pretty sure won't click with most people. It's kind of sad that The Outer Wilds was struggling early on, since the game is absolutely fantastic. This isn't a game for everyone, but it is a game that I will remember for a long time. Though the greatest struggle of The Outer Wilds is even talking about it, since everything past the tutorial is, to some extent, a spoiler. For the sake of this video, I'll be giving a surface level analysis on what is actually in the game. This is a space exploration game with a standout feature of having a game world consisting of a solar system, where each planet has their own simulated gravity, with the big hazard of this game being that all the planets in this solar system are stuck in a time loop that lasts for 22 minutes, and then the sun explodes. Each of the planets feel like their own beast with their own secrets to uncover. From the fear of falling coming from Brittle Hollow, to the claustrophobia in the Hourglass Twins, to the astrophobia taken to the next level in Giant's Deep. There's plenty of things to see on these planets, with several oddities in this game that I won't even go into, since the beauty of the Outer Wilds is figuring things out on your own. I alluded to fear when describing the planets, and that's one thing that I like about this game. This game captures the beauty and terror of space. The idea of being out in foreign, oftentimes dangerous territory, without the ability to breathe in this janky spaceship is kind of scary, but I'm still driven to explore because of the wonder of space. It's a hard balancing act, but The Outer Wilds does this very well. Though the one thing that holds this game together is cohesion. To demonstrate this point, here's an
inconsequential spoiler. In one of the planets, you find a dead jellyfish. One of your peers goes through its body and offers some random info about it. Now, I made the assumption that this was a dead end with nothing to show for it, but later in the game, I found a puzzle on a different planet that involved jellyfish. The solar system in the Outer Wilds feels incredibly cohesive, with every planet having some link to one another, and that's just incredible. It shows how much care was put into this game, and that goes doubly for the DLC. I was so enamored with Outer Wilds that I got the DLC as soon as I could. The game just left me hungry for more, and this content satiated this need. The DLC takes place on a ring-shaped space colony called The Stranger, an area so well integrated into the lore that it even explains how you couldn't find this in the base game. This level is just awe-inspiring. The art design for this stage is far grander than the planets of the main game, with the environmental storytelling taken to the next level. The inhabitants of the space station are a lot less open about the events that transpired on their ship, and learning about what actually happened is quite the journey. My only issue is that because this area is so isolated from the rest of the game, there isn't much cohesion. What this means is that the DLC approaches the base game's quality as opposed to outweighing it, but both of these are still worth your time. It's games like the Outer Wilds that reminds me as to why I love this medium as much as I do. Here's to good 2023, everyone. This is the Renegade Master, signing out. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Odds are you were expecting something like a review or the like from my channel, and I have some good news. In between my moments of struggling to get this video out, I turned my distraction into productivity and recorded some gameplay for the next video. It's on Katana Zero. I plan on making more reviews of standout games that I like, and maybe even putting out a ranking video as well, so expect some cool stuff in the near future.